Hey, good morning, everybody. This is Charlie Judy. I'm so glad that you've found some time to join us today to talk a little bit about workplace culture, something which I think we all agree is getting lots of conversation, notice, maybe even effort. And that's a lot of what I want to talk about today is kind of taking that effort to a different level and really starting to do something intentional, methodical, really in an invested and committed way around our workplace cultures. It turns out that we've been talking about workplace culture for decades now, but the fact of the matter is, few organizations really take the time to do anything meaningful and measurable with their workplace cultures. We we all know it's important, and certainly no one on this webinar today would argue with that. But what we do with it is where you really start to draw the power and hopefully differentiation in your business. And so we'll spend the next 45 minutes or so talking about some of that stuff and what we've learned along the way, and hopefully give you some things that you can take back to your own worlds. Just to kind of set the stage a little bit, and certainly I won't spend a whole lot of time talking about me, but just to kind of give you some backdrop. I founded WorkXO and our culture management platform about 3 years ago. Am now the president of the workforce product line with QuestionPro. QuestionPro brought our culture management platform into their suite of services just about 2 months ago, and we're really excited about an integrated platform of people analytics driven very much by culture. And what we're doing with that, would love to connect with you on that, obviously, somewhere down the road. That's not what this conversation is really about, but that's some context for you. I did spend, before I pulled the ripcord of on corporate America and jumped into the entrepreneurial space, 23 plus years as an HR exec, mostly in the professional services space. So there's some names there that maybe you recognize. I spent a fair amount of time actually overseas on a couple of long-term global assignments. I started my career, interestingly enough, as a CPA, and I think that's probably where my affinity for data and analytics and how all of that intersects with people and talent comes into play. Something I'm still very much interested in, and I am still a senior certified professional along the way. It's Tulane University in New Orleans in the United States, A.B. Freeman School of Business. So that's kind of my background. Just helps you understand maybe where my point of view is coming from. Let's start with just a conversation or a definition around culture. Part of the challenge that we have with culture management in general is that it's a little squishy. It's hard to really get our arms around it, and it's hard to find a consistent definition that I think we can all kind of coalesce around. I think that's changing a little bit. This is the definition that seems to work for us. So culture is all the stuff, the words, the actions, behaviors, and experiences that reinforce and clarify what's truly valued in your business. Now, that last part is really important. And one thing to note is that that's valued with a D, not values. Your values are important, and certainly what you hold out to the world and to your workforce is being central to what kind of drives your true north. That's an important thing. But whether or not those things are truly valued, truly embraced, truly integrated, truly embodied in your operating systems and what you do in your business, is all about culture. It's all about whether or not you're actually reinforcing and clarifying those things. And so getting our arms around what's really happening at the root, what's really happening behaviorally, what's really being experienced, that's understanding culture at a different level. And that's what I want to spend some time talking about today. Turns out that culture, as again we all know, is important. It shows up all over the place. I could give you a binder of citations and surveys and publications that would support this notion. But what's missed by most is that culture goes far beyond foosball tables and beer in the fridge. It's actually the fix. It's the driver, can be at least, the driver to real and permanent change in the workplace. You cannot address any one of these top workforce trends identified by Deloitte, just as an example, and there are others out there, without using culture to get you there. It doesn't matter, for instance, how much you aspire to be an organization of the future, or how much you aspire to create a environment that supports and invests in careers and learning. If you don't have the culture, the words, the actions, the behaviors, and the experiences behind those aspirations, all bets are off. Like, forget about it. And so if you don't have a plan, if you don't have a blueprint, we'll call it for sake of today's conversation, to help you reinforce and clarify these aspirations, don't even waste your time. It's a lost cause, and we see that. So let's compartmentalize this a little bit. Let's talk about culture almost in a formulaic way. There's kind of two components to this. The first is, do you know what's truly valued by your organization? And do you know what truly drives your organization's success? My guess is you do. And certainly collectively as an organization you do. If you didn't, you probably wouldn't be a going concern. You wouldn't be here anyway. So you have some clues. It could be your strategic plan. It could be what you've found historically makes a difference in your market and against your competitors. But you ought to be able to articulate that. And again, caution, this is not necessarily your values, right? It's what's truly valued, what really makes a difference, what drives success in your organization. You have to be able to articulate that first. Now that you have some clarity around that, are we behaving? Are you behaving? Are you acting? Are you interacting? Are you working? Are you getting work done in the way that absolutely reinforces and clarifies those success drivers? If you don't have that second factor in this equation, you cannot have the first. Or at the very least, you have sub-optimization, right? You are not aligned and you are not contributing at the level that you could or potentially should. At the worst, you've got disaster. It doesn't take a lot to point to some of the challenges or some of the outcomes of having misalignment in what you believe drives your success and what or how you actually act and behave. It's just even some recent examples in the news, certainly here in the United States, and point to some of the things that have happened at United Airlines, for instance. You know, this commitment to customer experience, yet the way that they are in fact treated in some pretty appalling ways. And again, this is not to single out United. This is something that's really challenging for all organizations and for all people. Wells Fargo here in the United States, another great example of having reinforced and clarified things that are not really in line with what drives their success and having to take some time to walk their way out of that. Look at Enron from decades ago. I'm sure many of you can recall what happened at Enron. And Enron had a fantastic set of values in their lobby. Everybody saw them every day. Yet the way that they acted and behaved, the way that their culture reinforced, or in fact didn't reinforce, those things became, frankly, almost an industry dissolver. It was cataclysmic to the economy. So that's the kind of stuff that we're talking about. And I'm not suggesting anybody on this call is at risk of any of those things where their organizations are. But you get a sense for the extent to which, kind of failure to get intentional about this can muck things up. So here's some suggestions. Number one, don't wing it. Have a plan. Get intentional about it. We plan and invest resources in and dedicate time and attention to pretty much every other important operating system in our business, whether it's our accounting systems, our sales cycle, our product development, our R&D. It doesn't matter. All of those operating systems get attention, and they get intention. Why isn't culture as important an operating system? Why aren't we treating it that way? And if we were, we'd have a plan. We'd have those resources. We'd be dedicated to it. We'd have people responsible for it, accountable to it. And we'd be managing it just as we do really any other operating system in the business. Second suggestion, choose function over form. This is really about getting introspective. This is really about keeping our eyes on our own paper. Don't get distracted by the shiny object. Don't think that you can copy culture. Don't think that someone else's function is going to fit your needs. You have to find out what works for you, your organization, what drives your organization's success, what works for you, your workforce, your industry, your organization, all of the context and the color that comes with it. And this is a hard thing for us to do. We like to pay attention to what others are doing around us, and it's good that we do. We need those clues, we need those signals. But stop worrying about stuff like good and bad, right? Stop worrying about whether or not you've got a good culture or a bad culture. Those terms are entirely relative. And they're relative to, again, who you are. And if we base whether or not we have a good culture on whether we're like or doing the same kinds of things that other organizations are doing out there, then we're likely headed down the wrong path. It doesn't mean that there aren't lots of good things that we could all be doing in our organization. That's kind of price of admission. The question is, are we doing the right things? Are we doing the stuff that's going to drive our success? We chase this kind of this evasive, this need to be a quote unquote great place to work. I think that that's leading us in the wrong direction. Stop worrying about the culture cool kids. There are lots of them out there. Zappos has a culture camp. You can go and learn a lot about how they do culture. But I'm going to tell you that most of what you'll learn probably won't have an impact on your business. I mean, again, would it be cool? Would it be fun? Might you impact your environment? Sure. But are you doing it in the right way? The flip side to this, Amazon got some some flack several months ago, like kind of late 2017, and was in the news, was kind of held out there as being, and this will just be for sake of simplification, kind of a cutthroat, hardcore environment. Like, I mean, you were busting, you were working really hard. There wasn't a lot of flexibility. Expectations were high. If you weren't producing, see ya. And Jeff Bezos, founder CEO, stood up and said something that I think is really, really important and we ought to be doing more of. He said, listen, guys, Amazon's culture is not for everyone. Not everyone is going to be successful here. Not everyone's going to even like it, but that doesn't matter. This is what works for us. This is what drives our success. That takes some ownership. That takes some commitment. They're very clear on how they work, and they're very clear on why they work that way. That's what drives their success. And if anybody on this call can argue with me that Amazon is not successful, I mean, love them or hate them, it doesn't matter. They are successful. There will be a first $1 trillion company in the near future, and Amazon is in the running for that. So they're doing something right, and what they're doing is getting very clear on what drives their success, and then they're building a culture that reinforces it and clarifies it really at every turn. So let's talk about being a surveyor. I mean, if you're building a plan, if you're building a blueprint, you got to really understand the current state before you start building on top of it or around it. And in our vernacular, that's all about data. What are we doing to really measure and understand the current state, analyzing it, taking the time to tease out the important factors? Are we measuring the right stuff? Are we measuring things that we can actually do something with? That's something that we in the world of work have had a challenge with. We're getting better, certainly, at paying attention to people analytics. We know it's important to us, but the trick is, are we getting analytics that we can actually do something with? And then are we actually doing something with it? And if we do, we know we can out-hire, out-manage, outperform their competitors. But again, this takes commitment. This takes attention. This takes time. So what are you doing to gather data on what your culture is today? And that's the first part, right? Let's not worry too quickly about measuring whether we are who we think we need to be. Let's understand first who we are. Let's take some time to gather some data around who we are today. And this is also a shift. We've got to start focusing on drivers, not outcomes. So, we've been measuring, many of us have been measuring the tried and trusted employee engagement score for, again, decades now. And it's a good measure. There's good science behind that. There's a lot to learn from it. But employee engagement and really the science behind it is at its core about measuring employee sentiment. It's about measuring how employees feel about work. And that's interesting, but it's an outcome. It's an outcome of every single thing that employee experiences, really from the moment they first encounter an organization and its brand, to the moment they're employed, to the experience that they have while they're on task, on time, every day, to the moment they're looking at that organization in their rearview mirror and they've decided to leave it. all of those experiences along the way contribute to sentiment, contribute to this outcome of employee engagement. It's all of that makes it kind of a lagging indicator. That's kind of the first thing to keep in mind. But sentiment doesn't help us understand what's behind it. And that's, again, where the culture is. That's the behavior. That's the driver. So let's talk about, or put into illustration here, really the difference between measuring outcomes and measuring drivers. And what this really comes down to is putting the right color and context behind it. If I were to ask any one of you to describe to me what it's like to work there, you would likely use some of the same words that everybody else out there uses. In fact, let's take it even a step further. If I were to ask you to describe to me what you're like as an individual, you are likely to use some of the same words that we all use to describe ourselves as individuals. It's hard to provide context and color that really lives and breathes and brings to life the experience that you're actually having. It's just a challenging thing to do. There are 7 billion human beings on planet Earth, and we share a very common DNA. Yet we are each distinctly unique. That's the same with organizations. Enterprise shares a lot of the same DNA, yet we are unique. We are distinct. And understanding those distinctions is where the magic happens at the cultural level. And that means getting down to behaviors. That means describing that experience with that color and that context. So you may say, you know what, we're collaborative around here. That's great. But what does that mean? Because collaboration can mean a whole lot of different things. Does it mean that we all get in a room together and we only make decisions as a team? Or does it mean that people can work with others from different departments without needing permission? And that's just an example. But I can start to build a picture in my mind around what it means when people can work with others from different departments without needing permission. I can kind of get a sense for even how that feels. We're innovative. That's cool, but like, so is every other company. At least we're all trying to be, right? How does that live itself out? How does that manifest? Well, it means that managers will back their employees up when they want to try new ways of doing something. Like, first of all, I get a picture for what that looks like. I can also measure whether or not that's happening. I can get a sense. If innovation is important to us, then what do we need to do to reinforce and clarify that? This is one of those things. We got to make sure that our managers are actually backing up their employees when they want to try a new way of doing something. I mean, you can take that statement even further. What does that look like? What does that feel like? You get the picture. We got to get down to this driver level. We got to get down to the behaviors, the organizational DNA. We are not great at this fourth one. I mean, we just aren't. The world of work, the pace at which we operate, continues to accelerate. Just look at the economy today and the way that our markets are evolving. We are continuously pushed to chasing what's next. And we have so many things that we could be doing. There are no shortage of great things that we could be doing in our organization for our people. The question is, are we doing the right things? Are we really getting good at focusing on those 1 or 2 or 3 or 4 or 5 things that we know are going to have the biggest impact on our business? And the same should be said for your culture blueprint. We cannot be all things to all people. Stop trying to pretend that you are. Because you sell a bill of goods and someone joins your organization and in 30 days they figure out what they thought they were signing up for is in no way what they signed up for, and they are as good as gone. That is a wasted investment. We have to be more authentic about who we are and who we are not, and then staying really laser focused on those things. How do we do it? Well, I mean, there are, you know, a million ways out there today for prioritizing. I think the world can be managed in a 4 square, a 2x2 or 4x4, whatever. Here's one for you. 2 continuums. On one end of the spectrum, how easy or hard is it to do? And on the other end of the spectrum, how much value is it going to contribute? You want to be doing most of the stuff up there in that upper right-hand corner. Easy to do, high value impact. You probably want to really sink your teeth into the stuff in that upper left-hand corner because it's got a lot of value, but it's just harder to do, which means it's going to take some time. And you need to hack away at it, step at a time. Don't boil the ocean. Don't try to figure it all out at once. Don't solve for it in one place. Iterate on it. Work on it over time. And we'll talk about some ideas for doing that in just a minute here. Maybe do some of that stuff in the lower right-hand corner. Yeah, it's easy to do. Maybe it's not going to add as much value, but it's kind of low-hanging fruit. We might as well do it. And never do that stuff in the lower left-hand corner. If I asked you all to kind of raise your hand or answer a poll for how much time you believe you spend in that lower left-hand corner, my guess is much higher than you want it to be. We're doing a lot of stuff that takes a lot of time that maybe on the surface looks like it's going to add some value, only to find that it doesn't. And that is that frustrating kind of endless circle of no return. I mean, it can be overwhelming, and it can be debilitating, and it can really be demoralizing to not only the people doing the work, but the users at the other end of it, the recipients of that work that you're doing. So we have got to get better at understanding that we cannot be all things to all people. We do not want to be all things to all people, that we are going to focus on those things only that have the biggest impact on our business and move on from there. All right, so somebody's got to own this. You know, there's a lot of debate around who owns culture. I can settle that debate for you right now. We all own culture. You know, you can argue that it comes from the top and it goes to the bottom, and it starts at the bottom, it goes to the top. It doesn't matter. It is a collective ownership. There's got to be some stewardship around it. You've got to create that stewardship around it. You've got to create momentum around it. And in order for that to happen, somebody's got to manage it. So in the parlance of construction and building and blueprints, somebody's got to be the general contractor, or somebody's have to be the general contractors. And again, this is where we see the difference between organizations who know that culture is important and organizations who actually do something about it. They create that kind of stewardship, that momentum, that ownership, etc. So we have a couple suggestions on how to do that. One thing, just to put this into perspective, we spend about $1 billion a year in the US on employee surveys. Most of those are employee engagement surveys. And some of the research that we did when we were putting together our model showed us that close to half, like 46% of HR leaders that we interviewed and surveyed said that they rarely, if ever, do anything meaningful with the results of those employee surveys. That's close to $500 million a year wasted on employee surveys. Why are we doing them? If we're not gonna turn those results into action, why are we doing it? So we can pat ourselves on the back? So we can get excited when scores go up by 1%? Or so that we can beat each other up when they go down by 1%? Like, who cares? None of that really means anything. And again, it's hard to do anything with. So what? We're 76 this year. We were 74 last year. What does that tell us? What do we do about that? Well, clearly half of the people out there don't really know. So we've got to find a way to start doing something with this. Do you all use an internal methodology? Do you have a process for doing work internally? This is something also we're not good at. I'll point to HR. I can point to HR because I spent 20 plus years in HR. We're not good at managing internal projects. We're not good at managing multiple commitments in any sort of meaningful way. If you want to talk about an organization that has competing priorities, HR does. There's so many things commanding its attention. And a lot of it is like really critical, crucial, transactional stuff that has to happen every day. It's hard then to do more than that. It's hard to do more than that unless you've got a methodology. There are many of them out there, and they exist for a reason. They help organizations get optimize their operating systems. They help them move the needle, and to do everything from prioritize to make sure that they're spending the requisite time and energy and effort, that they're holding themselves accountable, and that they're making an impact. Bunch of them out there. Some of them are rooted in the software development space. You'll recognize some of these terms: Agile, Scrum, etc. The one that we really want to steer clear from is Waterfall, which is so much more sequential, and every future requirement is dependent on the former requirement, so that the future requirement cannot move until the former requirement is dealt with. The other end of the spectrum is this kind of agile approach. If you have a chance to go and just do a little bit of research on where the agile methodology and principles came from and really what they are, there's a manifesto out there. And if you took that manifesto and like changed some of the terms, if you pulled the reference to technology out there and you put culture in there instead, you'd see some really strong relevance, some applicability. And so this is actually the approach that we use when dealing with culture management. We start by measuring and getting data. We move to analyzing it, and then we go to activate it. And we create stewardship for that culture. Typically, it's a group of no more than 10 employees from across the organization, all levels, all functions, all geographies, so that we've got a real diverse and integrated team that's really going to collaborate on this, and they're going to own it. They're going to drive visibility around it and accountability to it. They have ownership for analyzing the data, jumping into it, really understanding it, wallowing in it even, really becoming kind of data scientists to just understand, what is this thing telling us? And then they start to create an inventory. We call it a backlog of responses, actions, fixes, things that they want to do. But then they spend time prioritizing. And they don't work on doing everything on that list or responding to everything on that list. They work on those first 1 or 2 or 3 things. And that's it. And they don't start working on items 4, 5, and 6 until they've gotten finished with 1, 2, or 3. But they regularly meet to review and to discuss progress and iterate. Because what may be a priority today will be a different priority tomorrow. And the whole concept of agility is the ability to act on the inputs of your user base in a really fluid way, so that you're listening to your people and you're revisiting what's the most important thing given where we are today. And by the way, you're failing. You may have thought you had a fix, and you get, you know, a couple of weeks down the road and you figure out, no, this isn't going to work. Let's regroup, let's retalk, let's replan, let's reprioritize. You have to be comfortable with doing that. We've got to step away from this realm where we used to put a nice little clean bow on every package and deliver it so that it was clean and crisp and complete, only to find that, you know what, that's not really what people want or need. Or boy, that took so long to get that bow on that package that it's no longer relevant. We've got to be willing to deliver in small segments, little wins along the way. Don't worry about the big picture always. What's the one thing that we can do this week that's going to have an impact? And let's not spend a lot of time talking about it or worrying about it. Let's just go do it. And if it doesn't work, that's okay. We'll adjust and we'll do it differently. This is how the world of work is evolving. If we can apply this to how we manage culture, and obviously this is one slide for a pretty elaborate methodology. There's a lot to learn behind this. There's some great YouTube videos out there if you just want to go out and check them out. This is a really interesting concept, I think, though, as we think about intentionally managing an operating system in our business like culture. We got to be willing to inspect and make sure that what we said we were going to do is having the desired impact. We're not great at correlating, you know, kind of cultural activities or workplace activities or talent management to ROI. And we think there's some good ways to do it. I mean, you know, we'll look at turnover. Obviously, we have been for years. Interesting statistic, but pretty loaded. And we know that there's a certain amount of turnover baked into every organization. There always will be. I know we've been looking at employee engagement, but again, that's interesting. And employee engagement globally has not really moved substantively over the last several years, decades for that fact. I mean, we've stagnated, we've plateaued. In fact, last year, employee engagement scores, according to Aon, actually went down for the first time in like 6 years. But they're hovering. I mean, there's only so much employee engagement that you can get. And so maybe that's not the right measure. We use one that we call employee net promoter score. Many of you are maybe familiar with it. Maybe you're familiar with the net promoter science that was really developed more or originally as a measure of customer satisfaction, customer experience. And it's a pretty cool science. We won't spend really any time talking about it here, but it's the result and the measure of one question. How likely are you to recommend this organization for employment to a really good friend? And the answer to that one question gives us a sense for, again, not whether or not this is a great place to work or a fun place to work, but is this the right place to work? Am I having the kind of experience that challenges me, that stretches me, that, yeah, maybe engages me? Even by the nature of the question itself, it's more of a leading indicator, not a lagging indicator. We're measuring how likely we are to do something going forward. That gives us a sense. Now, what we've seen in the studies that we've done and the data that we've gathered, and we have now more than 500,000, close to 500,000, over 500,000 data points right now. That When cultural behaviors evolve and align with what are really the success drivers of an organization, employee net promoter scores go up. And convincingly, there's a really strong correlation. In fact, for every 1 point of increased cultural alignment on our scale, which again, we won't really talk much about that today, we've seen employee net promoter scores going up by as many as 20 points. That's a big kick. That's convincing evidence. So maybe there's something here. Maybe there's something worth looking at. So 6 ideas, 6 things. And we're at the end here, so if you want to submit via the chat box some Q&A, feel free, and we'll respond to them either here, or if we run out of time, we'll do it offline. Would love to keep the conversation going with you, or start the conversation with you for that matter. But just in review, number 1, when it comes to culture and creating a blueprint for it and getting intentional about it, don't wing it. Have a plan. What are you going to do? Who's going to help you? What does that look like? Do you have a budget? Do you need a budget? Who's going to get involved? Can you crowdsource it? Do you assign ownership for it? But what are you going to do? And why are you going to do it? Choose form over function. What's right for you? Not what's right for your neighbor or for your competitor or for the organization next door or for the culture cool kid for that matter. What's right for you? Understand that, own it. Number 3, get data. Take some time to understand and analyze what's really happening. Don't be worried about good or bad at this point. Just worry about is. What is? What is really happening at the behavioral level? Number 4, prioritize high value, high ease, and hack away at everything else. But prioritize. We cannot be all things to all people. Somebody's got to be the GC, or some buddies have to. We like that collaborative stewardship and the idea of really, endorsing and giving permission to a group of people who can collaborate and intentionally manage culture and be methodical about it. Use a methodology. Show the rest of the world internally that, listen, look what we do. Look at how we do it. We're serious about this. And then inspect. Stay on top of it. Monitor it. Take a look at impact. Adjust accordingly. And don't wait, just once a year. Don't do an employee engagement survey and be done with it. One data point is not enough. You need to get out there, and you need to kind of pulse away at things and understand what's happening along the way. It doesn't have to be a huge survey. It can be 1 or 2 questions. It could be just that one question: how likely are you to recommend this organization to a great friend for work? That could be a great thing for you to monitor on a more regular basis. But monitor it. Those are the steps. I'm going to throw up a contact form here. We'd love to hear from you. Please reach out to me directly, feel free, or to our general info email box. Would love for you to follow us on Twitter @WorkXO, and to get to know QuestionPro, the parent company of WorkXO today. If you're interested in learning more about our culture management platform, we'd of course be interested in talking with you about it. But I'd also love just to hear from you on, kind of how you're experiencing culture and how it's showing up on your agenda, et cetera. I do have one question that I'm going to respond to quickly, and then I think because we almost are out of time here, we'll take some time to respond to everything else offline. But the question is, how do you get a budget for this stuff? And that's a loaded question. That is a loaded question, and it obviously is highly dependent on your organization. But here's the one thing I'd suggest. I don't know that it takes a lot of budget. Again, because we're talking about behavioral stuff here, we're not talking about big programmatic changes. This isn't likely going to be about overhauling your performance management system or, you know, investing in a new online communication / collaboration tool. It doesn't have to be about that yet. You can take some first steps to both understanding and then doing something about. This goes back to that conversation around priorities. Look for those things that are easy to do and will have an impact. Are they going to solve every woe that your organization faces? Probably not. But will they move the needle towards solving those woes? Yes. Put one foot in front of the other. Worry about budget. It will come when you start to prove the impact that you're making, the attention you've given this, and the time that you're investing is paying off. So thanks again, everybody, for being here with us today. Really glad to have this conversation with you. Sorry I did all the talking. Wish we could find a way to make it a two-way conversation. We'll look forward to talking with you hopefully sometime in the very near future. Take care.